Hey, Anna.
Hey, Al.
Erica.
Hi, Al.
It's good to see you both. So, we have not prepared for this. I'm excited to talk with you both about how teaching, how classroom teaching, how the idea of education can be shaped by our ideas about experimental poetry. So, here it is. Are you ready? I haven't prepared you for this. What I'd like to do is quote a very familiar thing that John Cage once said, and I want to ask you how it could possibly relate to teaching, learning, education, etc. He said that he would like English language to be less understandable. Because when it's understandable, well, he says, people control one another and poetry disappears. As I was talking to my friend Norman Brown, he said syntax, which Cage adds, is what makes things understandable. Syntax is the army, the arrangement of the army. So what we're doing, Cage says, when we're making language ununderstandable is we're demilitarizing it so that we can do our living. So how could that counterintuitive and possibly quite radical claim that our job of artists, he means, is to make the language less understandable? How could that possibly relate to your own ideal mission as teachers? Erica, I know you're sort of in a Cagean situation there at your institute, partly because Joan Rotalick is kind of a, I was going to say patron saint, but kind of a founder, creator, idea maker, and she had a very close relationship to Cage, so this makes sense. So maybe you should start.
Well, I think that the idea of making language ununderstandable is what should happen in a classroom. Because if you understand... Generally, because if you understand something, if language is automatically understandable, then there's no work to do. Like what you want as a teacher is to activate critical thinking. Like, I think a lot about the importance of students understanding that they have ideas and that their ideas are interesting. And that can't happen if you're not constantly thinking about ways to uproot how language is working and turn something that feels familiar into something that's entirely other.
So teaching is defamiliarization, which is another way of saying it's better if you don't understand me. Anna, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm just thinking about that moment in a classroom where a teacher will ask, has just given, a long lecture or something, and then ask, okay, does anyone have any questions? And because there's just been lecture, there's been no opportunity for discourse or discussion, no other juncture where a teacher has offered a question or offered an opportunity for someone to come in. When they say, okay, so does anyone have any questions about anything? Of course no one is going to raise a question, right? In that moment. Because
they've been silenced into just listening.
Yeah. So that's a situation in which language has been made understandable, right? The sort of function of the lecture is for everything to be understandable, to not be questioned, to not be...
To explain.
Yeah. So when you don't... So in that moment, no one's going to ask any questions and things are just going to continue uninterrogated and unchallenged.
Both of you gave really persuasive, progressive answers to this. Erica in particular, but both of you, responded by saying, this is the basic foundational mission of great teaching. It's always been. And I accept that, right? But there is a radical part of what Cage is saying that you both deliberately avoided so as not to seem like some kind of, freak leftos or something, He says that the understandable language is militarized language. I assume he's referring to authoritarianism, which was implicit in what you just said, right? The end of the lecture means the end of a certain kind of authoritarianism in a space where people are supposed to learn.
Well, the lecture is an authoritative teaching mode. Yeah.
It is. So I invite you, if you want, to be a little more radical. If you want to respond to Cage's, in the realm of Cagean poetry music, it's not so radical. He's saying, I want to break things down so that I'm basically performing something people won't understand. I'm okay if they get up in a huff and leave when I'm performing. Cage was famously not interested in giving people what they wanted. But teachers are famously wanting to give students a sense that they're safe and that it's okay. etc. So do you want to accept my invitation and take up this question of militarization?
I do. And I'm thinking about a different Cage quote that, and I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but it's from an essay called Diary Emma Lake Music, in a book called A Year from Monday. And in it, he says something like, teaching too is like a conversation. And I think that that's where the radical comes in. Because I think that, at least in the work that I do in public schools, the idea that teaching is a conversation is not always the prevalent pedagogy at play. So I think that that goes in line with the idea of thinking of syntax as army. If you're inviting students to enter into a conversation, you're leveling a certain hierarchy that's at play, and you're also shifting syntax. So you're demilitarizing a language that was ordered in a very specific way to be kind of directed at a student instead of an exchange with the student.
Well done. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Not
that was
easy
awesome.
to say that. Anna, you get the last word on this.
I guess I just want to echo something that Erica said in the beginning, which is that if the function of teaching is to activate critical thinking, you can't do it when everything is sort of straightforwardly kind of handed to you, delivered to you, already kind of digested. Like, I'm thinking about textbooks. I'm thinking about, the ways that your eyes just kind of glaze over when you read a textbook passage that tells you, like, when this happened, and then this person married that person, this person, like, conquered this area, right?
You're thinking of kings and queens and nationalism.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Who came first? Napoleon the first.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you really don't need anything other than Stein to tell you, right?
History teaches that
History teaches.
I can't help but add a final word, and it's totally goofy because I don't really know the anthroarchaeology of this. I can surmise it, having read a bunch of books as a kind of duffer about the origins of humans. But it seems obvious to a lot of experts in this that teaching began with the passing on of skills, so that when Homo sapiens became a species that didn't depend on its genetic inheritance to learn everything that it needs to know, as many animals are primarily able to learn through their genetic code how to run away from this or how to... And when human beings began to do things by nurture, teaching meant showing, but it didn't mean telling. It generally meant making alongside. So it was basically skill building, right? And poesis is making. As Joan Rotalick reminds us, constantly poesis is making. And if we can, instead of making a stick with a sharp end or something that will make cleaning out our dwelling easier, or something that will prop up our dwelling in a storm or whatever, or how we can continue the fire beyond one fire to the next, day to day, that kind of stuff. In the classroom, we're trying to do that with ideas and with art, which is basically to show people by having them make it with us. That's what a conversation is.
Totally.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Thanks, Al.